All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into something pretty interesting. It's called Facebook's Little Red Book.
Yeah.
And it's basically an internal document that outlines their company philosophy and values.
Yeah, kind of like a secret handbook for how they think.
Exactly. It's like getting a peek behind the curtain of this tech giant,
Right.
to see what makes them tick.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because it doesn't start off like a typical, corporate manifesto.
Okay.
It actually frames Facebook's origin as a social mission.
Interesting.
It's not a business venture.
So like, what does that look like? What is their social mission?
Well, they paint this grand vision
Okay.
of a world where people are more open and connected.
Mm.
They use all these visuals like friendships spanning continents,
Oh, wow.
to really drive that point home.
It's a pretty ambitious goal, wouldn't you say?
It is.
Yeah.
And they go even further by arguing that changing how people communicate can fundamentally change the world.
So they're not just talking about connecting friends and family. They're thinking bigger picture, like societal level change.
Exactly. They even draw this parallel between ancient cave paintings and Facebook status updates.
That's pretty interesting.
Illustrate this deep-seated human need to share and connect.
Right, because we've always done that in some form or another.
Exactly.
So how does all of this tie back to Facebook's role in the world then?
Well, the document introduces this concept called Zuckerberg's Law,
Okay, I've heard of this.
which basically states that the amount of information shared online doubles every year.
Wow, that is a lot of information.
And they have this really striking visual, it's a bar graph
Yeah.
that shows this exponential growth of online information versus our limited capacity as humans to actually process it all.
Right, we can only take in so much.
Exactly. So it's almost like they're acknowledging the potential downsides
Yeah.
of this hyper-connected world they're building.
So what's the solution?
Yeah.
How do they propose we deal with all of this information?
Well, that's where their emphasis on people over data comes in.
Okay.
There's this great quote from the book, data won't bring you soup when you're sick or take you to a bar when you get dumped.
It's so true, though. It's a good reminder that technology should be serving us, not the other way around.
Exactly.
But how does that philosophy actually play out when you're dealing with a platform as massive as Facebook?
Well, the document highlights just how huge Facebook is.
Okay.
Stating that 1 in 7 people on the planet uses it,
Wow.
which is mind-boggling when you think about it.
It is.
And they even try to represent that scale visually with these symbolic figures.
Uh-huh.
And for a Facebook engineer, this means that each one is responsible for roughly 1 million users.
Oh, wow. So much pressure.
Right.
Yeah.
So you might think they've achieved their goal of connecting the world.
Yeah, it seems like it.
But the very next image in the document emphasizes the 6 billion people who are not on Facebook.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like they're constantly looking ahead, aware that even with their massive reach, there's still so much more to do.
Yeah, it's interesting how they balance that sense of accomplishment with this constant drive for growth.
Right. And that leads us to a really core element of Facebook's culture, what they call the hacker way.
Okay, let's unpack that. What is the hacker way?
Well, it's more than just technical skill.
Yeah.
It's a mindset,
Mm,
a way of approaching problems with resourcefulness
right.
and a willingness to push boundaries and break the rules.
So they give some examples of this in the book.
Oh, they do. They have this photo of a crosswalk
Mm-hmm.
where someone literally hacked an extra path across the street,
I love that.
demonstrating that find a solution mentality.
That's great.
And then there's this story of this Facebook engineer who kept trying to launch a project
Okay.
and he failed repeatedly.
Oh, no.
But through those failures, he stumbled upon the idea for timeline.
Huh. So it's about embracing failure?
Exactly. Failure as part of the learning process.
I like that.
And then there's this really funny anecdote about them faxing a dog photo to TechCrunch.
Wait, they faxed it? Who even uses fax machines anymore?
Exactly. It's that kind of unconventional thinking they're celebrating.
Oh, I see.
This willingness to break the rules and try things that other people might think are absurd.
So from this hacker way, philosophy emerges, this really unique company culture, right?
Exactly.
And one of the most well-known aspects of that is their motto, move fast and break things.
Yeah, very Silicon Valley.
But do they actually mean that? Like, is that really how they operate?
Oh, they do. It reflects their emphasis on rapid iteration and learning by doing, even if it means making mistakes along the way.
Which is almost the opposite of how most companies operate,
It is.
where they're trying to avoid risk at all costs.
Right. But Facebook seems to embrace it.
So is there a method to their madness, or is it just pure chaos?
Well, they actually have a core value called Be Bold,
Okay.
which encourages employees to take risks, to challenge conventional thinking, to constantly push boundaries.
And I think they sum it up pretty well with the quote, "The riskiest thing is to take no risk."
Exactly. They believe that playing it safe stifles innovation.
Right.
And ultimately leads to stagnation.
Makes sense. But it can't just be about reckless risk-taking, right? There has to be some sort of purpose behind it.
You're right. They also emphasize the importance of building social value,
Okay.
which means prioritizing trust with users and focusing on how their work can have a positive impact on the world.
So it's not just about building a product. It's about building something meaningful.
Exactly. And to achieve that, they talk about the importance of ruthless prioritization.
What does that mean?
It means identifying and focusing on the most impactful projects,
Okay.
the ones that have the potential to make the biggest difference.
So they say no to a lot of good ideas, probably.
All right, right. As they say, products that don't exist rarely change the world.
True. So once they've identified those priorities, how do they make sure they get things done?
That's where the principle of stay focused and keep shipping comes in.
So it's all about consistent execution and delivering results.
Exactly. They even adapted that famous USPS motto to reflect this.
Let me guess. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night.
So stays these hackers from completing their code.
There it is.
It speaks to their dedication and their perseverance.
It's like nothing can stop them.
Right. And all of these values tie back to this core belief in constant evolution.
Which makes sense in the tech world. If you're not evolving, you're falling behind.
Exactly. And there's this very blunt quote in the book, if we don't create the thing that kills Facebook, someone else will.
It's like they're their own biggest competitor.
Right.
Constantly trying to disrupt themselves before someone else does.
Exactly.
But how do these values translate into real-world practices within the company?
Well, we actually get some insight into that through internal emails from Mark Zuckerberg himself.
Oh, that's cool. I always love seeing how these big ideas actually play out in a company.
Me too.
Yeah.
And these emails offer a fascinating glimpse into his leadership style and how he tries to instill these values within the company.
So what kind of insights do you get from these emails?
Well, for one, he's very practical.
Okay.
There's this email about employee perks,
Yeah.
where he makes it clear that the focus should be on perks that actually enhance productivity.
So not just like free food and ping pong table.
Right. He's very results-oriented.
Hmm.
He also seems to be acutely aware of the danger of complacency.
Makes sense.
There are several emails that highlight this constant need to push forward, to never settle.
Right. Always iterating.
Exactly. And then there's this quote from one of his emails that really stood out to me. He says, "No one cares what we say. They only care about what we make."
That's powerful.
Yeah.
It's all about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly.
So even though Facebook is this massive global giant, they're still trying to maintain that scrappy hacker way spirit.
Right.
It's fascinating.
It is. It raises some interesting questions, though. Like, can that culture truly scale as they continue to grow?
Mhm. And will this pursuit of connection actually lead to a more open and connected world as they envision it?
Those are the big questions.
They are. But before we get into that, I think we should step back and examine the context of Facebook's mission a bit more.
Okay, you mean the whole idea of connecting people and changing how we communicate.
Exactly. It's a powerful idea,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also one that's been met with both praise and criticism.
Right.
And it's not a new idea either.
Yeah. Every new communication technology, from the printing press to the internet, has faced similar questions and challenges.
So how does Facebook's ambition fit into that larger narrative of human communication?
That's what we need to explore.
Let's do it.
Let's take a little journey back in time and
Okay.
see how it all connects.
I'm ready.
All right. One thing that really stood out to me is how the document highlights this pattern throughout history of communication innovations being met with fear and resistance.
Yeah, it's like people are always a little bit scared of anything that changes the way we interact and share information.
Right, exactly. And they even include this visual timeline that starts with the invention of the printing press in 1440
Okay.
and traces these advancements, through the U.S. Postal Service, the train, all the way up to today's digital age.
That's really interesting. It's funny to think that all those things that we take for granted now were once seen as potential threats.
It is. They even quote Socrates,
Oh, wow.
who was apparently worried that writing would make people forgetful because they would rely too much on external sources instead of their own memory.
Oh, the irony.
Right.
Because now we have the same fears about the internet and smartphones.
Exactly. It's like this recurring theme.
It is.
And it wasn't just Socrates. There were similar concerns about the telegraph, the radio, even television.
They even included that great quote from a 1946 editorial about television.
Oh, yeah. Television won't be able to hold on to any market it captures after the first 6 months. People will soon get tired of staring at a plywood box every night.
Which obviously turned out to be completely wrong.
So wrong. But those same fears about technology, impacting our attention, spans our relationships. Even our brains are still around today.
Right. So what does this tell us about Facebook's mission to connect the world? Are they just repeating the patterns of the past?
It's a good question. The document acknowledges that they're not immune to those challenges and that their efforts to connect people can have unintended consequences.
Especially with all the controversies around data privacy and the spread of misinformation.
Absolutely. And they include this really interesting image of a spiral to illustrate how public perception can often be out of sync with reality.
It seems like they're trying to walk this tightrope between this really idealistic vision and the really messy reality of operating a platform with billions of users.
Yeah, they are. And they emphasize the importance of transparency, listening to critics, and constantly working to mitigate those negative impacts.
They make this interesting statement. Tech companies are not poets. What do you think they mean by that?
I think it's a reminder that their role is to solve problems, not just to spin narratives or create beautiful illusions.
Right. Their impact is real, and they need to be accountable for it.
Exactly. It connects back to that Zuckerberg quote, "No one cares what we say. They only care about what we make."
It all comes back to that walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Right.
But it's also important to remember that Facebook isn't operating in a vacuum.
Right. They're part of this larger ecosystem, this constantly evolving digital landscape.
And the document makes it clear that they're aware of that.
Yeah, they emphasize that a lot.
So they're not just focused on connecting people, they're also trying to anticipate the future of technology.
Yeah, exactly. They're not just sitting back and enjoying their success. They're constantly looking ahead, trying to figure out what's next.
Which brings us back to that quote about being their own biggest competitor.
If we don't create the thing that kills Facebook, someone else will.
It's a pretty bold statement.
It is. But it shows how determined they are to stay relevant and keep innovating, even if it means disrupting their own business.
So after exploring Facebook's Little Red Book, what's your biggest takeaway? What really stood out to you?
I think for me, it's this tension between their grand vision of connecting the world and the very practical reality of building and managing a platform at that scale. It's this ongoing story of ambition and innovation and this drive to push boundaries, but it's a story that's still being written.
And for you, what will you be thinking about long after this episode is over?
I think what really strikes me is how Facebook is grappling with these really fundamental questions about technology and society that we've been asking ourselves for centuries.
Like what?
How do we balance the benefits of connection with the potential downsides? How do we make sure that technology serves humanity, not the other way around?
Right.
Those are questions that we all need to be thinking about as we navigate this digital world.
Well said. And it reminds us that the story of Facebook is really our story. It reflects our own hopes and fears and dreams and anxieties about the role of technology in our lives.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into Facebook's Little Red Book.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been a really fascinating journey.
It has. And for our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep connecting. It's interesting how Facebook's Little Red Book tries to position the company within this larger historical context of communication technology.
Yeah, they really emphasize that they're part of this ongoing evolution of how humans connect and share information.
Right. And they're trying to learn from the past, about the successes and the failures, recognizing that each new wave of technology brings both opportunities and challenges.
It's like they're saying, we're not the first and we won't be the last.
Exactly. They're standing on the shoulders of giants, but they also seem very aware of the potential pitfalls.
And one of those pitfalls, as we talked about, is this potential for unintended consequences. Like, how do they balance this mission of connecting everyone with the reality that more connection doesn't always equal better outcomes?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And the document touches on it, but I think it's something they're still figuring out. There's this image in the book of a scale. And it seems to represent this balancing act.
Right, between connection and its potential downsides.
Exactly. Like they're trying to weigh the benefits against the risks and acknowledge that there's not always an easy answer.
And I think that's where their emphasis on constant evolution comes in. They're not pretending to have it all figured out.
Yeah.
They're experimenting, adapting,
Trying to find that sweet spot.
trying to find that sweet spot where technology really empowers people without, doing more harm than good.
Exactly.
And it all comes back to that quote about Facebook being its own biggest competitor.
If we don't create the thing that kills Facebook, someone else will.
It's a pretty bold statement.
It shows how much they understand that the tech landscape is constantly shifting, and what works today might not work tomorrow.
So they're trying to stay ahead of the game,
Always.
even if it means disrupting their own business.
Exactly.
So after this deep dive into Facebook's Little Red Book, what's your biggest takeaway? What's going to stick with you?
For me, it's this realization that Facebook, for all its complexities and its controversies, it's really a reflection of us. It's like a mirror to our own desires for connection and our anxieties about privacy and all of our hopes and fears about the future of technology.
That's a really powerful thought.
It is.
And it makes this whole exploration of Facebook's Little Red Book that much more relevant.
Absolutely. It's not just about understanding Facebook, the company. It's about understanding ourselves.
And our place in this digital world.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the world of Facebook.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep connecting.